Right, welcome everybody, and welcome to today's super duper interview because I've got the main man himself, managed to track him down, hunt him down, managed to get a bit of his time. The main man himself, Dr. Joe Klemczewski. So, Dr. Joe, welcome. Thanks so much for doing this, by the way, bud. If anybody's not familiar with Dr. Joe, Joe is, I think the kind of main thing you're well known for, Joe, correct me if I'm wrong, is that you kind of invented tracking macros over things like 26, 27 years ago, right? And you kind of observed the whole typical approach to dieting and realized that it was fundamentally flawed, and it was a little bit wrong, if you like. So you kind of observed that and started having to play around with that. So yeah, and also you've got a couple of PhDs, you've got a shopping list of degrees, you're just a live student, you're a family man, you're a businessman, you've just got this whole thing behind you. So welcome, mate. Thanks so much for doing this.
Appreciate it.
Time. But yeah, if we could start off, I would be super appreciative if we could start off with the two main problems that sort of my market, or the people that I speak to on a daily basis are struggling with. So that's typically, so just so you're aware, I think you know this anyway, but so the type of person that we're speaking to is usually males between 30 and 40 years old. So they might have a kid, they might have a couple of kids, they might even just be thinking about having kids. They're probably pretty stressful with their job, they're probably doing quite well with their job, those types of things, the day-to-day struggles that we all encounter with that. But I think the main two problems from observing and speaking to a lot of people that they are going to be encountering day to day is first of all, that their main problem or the main priority is that they want to bring their stomach fat down, right? So that's their number one goal, but also is that they're struggling to be consistent. They're struggling to be consistent with their diet. They're struggling to have an approach that they can be consistent with to actually get the body fat and the stomach fat down into a position that they're happy with. So, unpack that however you want. I know it's quite a broad sort of, there's different ways you could take that, but I would love to know how you would, dive into that, and how would you start to unpack those problems?
Well, first of all, thanks for having me, Matt. That's it's an unbelievable honor to be here. You're such a good friend, and I know you're a great coach. You give so much value to your clients over there, and it's just been fun to get to know you almost over the entire last decade and see you grow. And I just couldn't imagine somebody giving more of the knowledge and the service necessary to help people succeed like you do. So my hat is off to you. I want to say that as we get started. And as kind of a reflection point of what I just said, your two questions are possibly more interrelated than you even think. How do you reduce that body fat level? You've gained, 15, 20, 30 pounds of body fat around the middle. So you're struggling with losing body fat, and then you're also struggling with the consistency of any type of intervention. So whether that's, a training program, nutrition program, diet, how do I, with my busy lifestyle, with my family, my work, how do I stay consistent? Those two things are completely related in a huge way. And it's because of a physiological phenomena called the metabolic switch. And in my company, for the last 25 to 30 years, I've taught it in the frame of a little bit of an analogy called metabolic positioning. And, you mentioned that I was the one who brought macronutrient tracking, macros, to the world. And in a sense, that's right. Obviously, I didn't invent those. We've always known through research, protein does this, carbohydrates do this. But before I came along, nobody was tracking those nutrients. It was always either simply counting calories, or it was just living by a particular meal plan. But nobody was saying, hey, you need this amount of protein for these reasons. You need this amount of carbohydrates, and here's how you do this, and here's why. Nobody had ever put that all together. And it is a little bit odd looking back almost 30 years, because now this is probably $1 billion industry in and of itself. You look at all the macro tracking apps, you look at macro coaches, none of this existed before me as a 27-year-old sitting in my gym in Evansville, Indiana, started teaching this to clients. It all started right there.
Exactly.
And Now that it's so normalized and people just intuitively kind of gravitate toward that, they download an app and they start tracking. I think we still kind of miss the broader and bigger point, which is that these food substrates have an impact on our body in different ways, and the different ways we choose to eat them, not just the food source or the food quality, but the time of day, how we construct the meals, the meal cycles. Intermittent fasting is really big right now. We're always in this kind of death match between ketogenic dieting and carbohydrates. So there's just as much confusion out there as there has ever been. So I really do want to teach people why this matters and how to make it simple. And so that's one of the reasons why I started our project, the Flexible Dieting Institute, because I still think there's just a lot of misinformation, a lot of misunderstanding out there. And to me, to answer your two questions, how do I lose body fat? You have to understand what that metabolic switch is. And then to be consistent with it, you have to know how easy this can work for you if you do it right. So if I asked one of your clients, Matt, if I said, hey guys, I'm going to show you how on the same amount of food you're eating right now, you can lose twice as much body fat. Do you think they would say, yeah, I'll take that plan? Like, that's the one I want. I want to be able to eat the same amount of food and lose twice the body fat. Well, that's it. It just takes being consistent. So if you understand this one physiological step that I'm gonna teach you now, you'll really have almost everything you need. So our body, in the presence of enough, and I'm air quoting that, enough energy. So the meals that we're consuming, we're not in a calorie deficit per meal. We're not in a calorie deficit per day. We have enough food. Then our body is dominantly using glucose or carbohydrate as energy. So the meals that we consume, we're going to use those carbohydrates first. And then when we run out of those carbohydrates in our digestive system, then we use stored carbohydrates first in the form of what's in our liver, and then in stored glycogen levels in our muscle tissue. And we've got about 3 or 4 days worth of stored carbohydrates in a normal calorie deficit. If we were to just stop eating altogether, like just fast, like stop eating now and don't eat again, not another single calorie, it would take about 12, 14, 16 hours before you run out of all of the energy substrates in your bloodstream. So blood sugar, blood lipids, and stored glycogen, stored carbohydrates in your liver. At that point, your body makes a fundamental physiological shift, and it is called the metabolic switch, where you go from using dominantly glucose as energy. If you look at this like almost like a speedometer or a gas tank gauge, fuel gauge, then you've gone all the way over now to where you have to use body fat as energy. Hormonally, there's a big transition to where you start using body fat as energy. It's incredibly uncomfortable. And I'm gonna say this hoping that people don't think you have to do this, but I have been doing a single day fast every single Monday for a month. And so it's just dinner to dinner. Sunday night I eat dinner. I don't eat again until Monday dinner. So 24 hours of fasting. I feel that metabolic switch every single Monday at around 11 a.m. It's like, you wake up, you miss breakfast, no big deal. You get a couple hours into the day, start to get a little hungry, no big deal. But all of a sudden I get around lunch and I feel hypoglycemic. I feel shaky. I feel anxious. And that's when my blood sugar is bottomed out. My liver glycogen has all been used. And now there is nothing left to use as energy except body fat. And so my body hormonally will start releasing more glucagon and maybe even some adrenal gland, adrenals like norepinephrine, epinephrine if I'm active. And I start changing body fat into energy. I start taking body fat out of body fat cells, so around your stomach, wherever you're storing your body fat, and I start converting that into usable glucose and ketone bodies. And now my body has flipped. I've gone from this side of the fuel gauge to this side where I'm maximally using glucose. Now I'm maximally using body fat. And then I feel better. Within about an hour, my bloodstream catches up. I start feeling better. The hunger goes away. Even start feeling better. Like in the afternoon, I'll do some cardio. And I'm like, wow, I really feel like I have a lot of energy. 4 hours ago, I thought I was going to pass out. Now I feel great. That's because your body is now burning body fat faster, and that's your new energy source. So, then I have a nice normal little dinner Monday night, and that's over for a week. And I'm only doing that, Matt, because I want to test different forms of meal spacing and fasting. I did a medical fasting class maybe 25 years ago. That's when I started messing around with fasting like this. But you don't even have to go to that extreme. That's how you can do that in a matter of half a day. But if you just start a calorie deficit, maybe 500 calories a day, you've dropped down, you've spread your meals apart so you're not snacking every time you're hungry, then in about 3 or 4 days, you'll reach that same place. And it's probably going to still have that impact. You're still going to feel pretty uncomfortable at some point. You're going to be like, that's that moment when my liver was really empty of glycogen and I really felt hungry and so forth. The problem is, and this is where I'm pulling in this second part of your question, Matt, consistency. That's the part where a lot of people cave in and they get really hungry. And so they go have, an extra meal, or they maybe even binge a little bit, or they just have some extra calories. And then they refill all of those glycogen stores back to square one. And now they have to start all over again. So if you just get that metabolic switch hormonally into the position that you want, that's favorable for body fat loss, and you stay there, it becomes so much easier. You will feel better. You'll have less hunger. You'll have more energy. But if you go back and forth, then you're always feeling your worst when you're trying to diet, and you'll never get the momentum. You'll never get to that place where you're losing body fat and staying there. You'll be toggling back and forth between restoring and losing and restoring and losing glycogen and carbohydrates. So I know this kind of brushes up against ketogenic dieting, and somebody could say, well, Joe, if that's what happens, then why eat any carbohydrates? Let's just never eat carbs again. But there's a lot of problem with that we could talk about later. What I want to let people know is, when you are in that position, when you've already paid the price to get into that metabolic position to start losing body fat, all it requires is consistency. You can still eat 3, 4, 5 meals a day. You could still have your pre-workouts, your post-workouts. You're getting enough protein. You're doing all the things that you would teach your clients, Matt, but you just can't slam yourself all the way back to that starting point repetitively, week after week after week, and expect to get anywhere.
Yeah, no, that's cool. Yeah, no, it's great. It gives you a big bird's eye view of just physiologically what's going on. So it gives you a bit more insight. So if I were to say to you then, Joe, based off of that, like what is a good way to find that nice deficit, or that kind of sweet spot where we can hold it in a position long enough? Like, if somebody's got 30, 40, 50 pounds of body fat to shift, then, that means we're probably going to have to diet for, depending on the person's, metabolic rate and things like that, we're going to have to diet for a good 4, 5, 6 months at a time, right? Mm-hmm. So like, how would somebody go about like kind of finding that nice sweet spot, or that place which allows them to stay in that metabolic position, but then also not to be too aggressive, that is difficult to sustain, if that makes sense?
Yeah. No, really, really good question. And this is why it still at some level comes down to math. And so 27, 28 years ago, when I'm teaching clients how to add up, protein, carbs, and fat, and I'm giving them levels, here's how many calories a day, I'm estimating you need, here's this calorie deficit. So here's where we're going to draw that from. Here's going to be your carbohydrate levels for the day, your fat. All of that is math. I mean, we're doing real finite, addition and subtraction. And at the same time, there are emotions tied to that. There's hunger tied to that. There's family life. All these things get in the way of that consistency. So when you've got that long-term goal of, losing, for 4 or 5 months to reach that ultimate goal, you have to consider a pace that's comfortable, and then also giving yourself the margin for error that you can still live with. So what I mean by that is, I started last November or so, losing a little bit of body fat. I had spent a few years intentionally gaining weight because I wanted to kind of work on more, powerlifting and muscle gain and so forth. I had spent about 10 years within 5 to 8 pounds of my professional bodybuilding contest stage weight. So I've always competed at a certain level. You know, this is my leanest body fat at about 4% body fat. This is where I knew I could look my best. Once I retired, I spent an entire decade very close to that. I just went up to my metabolic set point and I kind of stayed there. Then I decided after a decade, you know, I'm getting kind of bored. I've had enough of this. I wanted to gain a little bit. I wanted my strength to move up. So I intentionally added 5 pounds over the course of the next 4 years. So I gained about 20 pounds in 4 years, very incrementally and so forth. And then I stayed there for a couple of years. Then I decided, okay, now I want to come back down. Now I'm, you know, I've done that. I'm gonna tighten back up a little bit. So all I had to do, Matt, my food intake was consistent enough that I just had my breakfast, snack, lunch, pre-workout, workout, post-workout meal, dinner, then maybe another evening snack. So that's a lot of eating. That's 7 or 8 meals if you include those snacks. All I had to do was take out my mid-morning snack and my mid-afternoon snack. And so I extended the amount of time between breakfast and lunch so that right when my body was getting ready to start using body fat as energy, I would have that morning snack and I'd go back to zero. Now I didn't have that snack, so I used a little bit more body fat in between meals. Then I had lunch and I would use that, but it wasn't enough to go back to zero. So gradually I'm moving that needle to the point where, you know, I'm still going back and forth a little bit with the food I'm consuming, but it's not on this end of the scale where it's glucose, glucose, glucose. It's more like, okay, body fat, and then a little bit of the food I'm eating, body fat. So I've changed that position. You know, wasn't doing any fasting. All I did was cut out a couple snacks, started increasing my cardio a little bit, and I've lost 15 pounds. And over the course of about 3 months, you know, a nice slow pace. So for somebody who is looking for this to be a long-term consistent process, you've got to make sure that consistency is there. Watch the pace. The proof is going to be there in your metrics. You know, if I don't lose any weight for 3 weeks, I know I'm now consuming too much food. You know, I'm eating more for maintenance. So, you know, this also includes, Matt, you're always going to have room for that occasional splurge or that cheat meal, and you've got to factor that in. So maybe I eat even a little bit less day to day in my normal days when it's more tolerable. And then, you know, I can have that nice indulgence on the weekend once or so. If you're paying attention to that, that's not the same thing as going back to the starting point. You know, one controlled higher meal is not the same thing as an entire weekend binge or something like that.
Yeah, no, for sure. Yeah, no, that's great, bud. It hit the nail on the head, as they say, right? So, yeah, no, that's great. Thanks for sharing that, Joe. So now I did want to. I know a lot of interviews and podcasts and stuff kind of start off with the story, you know, about yourself. But I enjoy to eat dessert first. You know what I mean? Like I enjoy the brownies before and the chocolate before. So I wanted to dive into that because I think they are the main two problems that most people watching this will be experiencing. But yeah, no. So yeah, Joe, let's dive into your story then, bud, because it's just incredible. Like it's a fascinating story. But I think if we started off with you know, the whole macro thing, like kind of where it came from, like how you was, you know, because I know your story quite well, like you were studying and you were also like competing, like drug-free bodybuilding. You know, there is actually a thing of drug-free bodybuilding. And then, you know, over the years, you've gone on to coach, I think it's like 500-600 people now to like their pro cards and all that, right? Is that right? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Which is just incredible. So, and then now, like you said previous, is like, you know, the macro methodology of actually, you know, the whole idea of just tracking macros is like the go-to approach for dieting now, pretty much, right? Especially in the physique world, but I think even more so now, just, you know, Gen Pop day-to-day people as well, you know, in any type of performance, whether it's running or cycling, and you know, and that's pretty fascinating. So I'd be interested to see kind of where that whole thing started, and then like, how has it been for you to see it go from this little seed here and then like nearly 30 years later become like this global friggin' thing? What, you know, it's just taken a life of its own.
Yeah, that has been very interesting, you know, from kind of an insider and an outsider view. But you know, to my story itself, I was a college student and had always been lifting weights. I mean, from the time I was 11 or 12 years old, I think I was already subscribing to muscle magazines. I was lifting weights. My dad had an old, you know, cement weight, you know, plastic coated cement weights out in the garage. And so by the time I was 11, 12 years old, I was training aggressively. You know, I was not missing a workout. I was reading everything I could. You know, my mom had gotten me a weight belt for my birthday or something when I was about 12 years old, and I still have that. And so this was part of me. I loved it. I loved it as a sport. I loved it as a culture. I loved what it was doing for my athletic career as a baseball player. So as I went through my teen years, like this was a huge part of me. It was my identity. It was my life. And then after high school, I went to the military and I was no longer playing any, you know, sports, but I was lifting weights and I was still part of the bodybuilding culture. And so the next logical step was to compete. And even in my mid teens, I had made a goal, like I'm going to compete before I'm 21. And I had a goal of turning pro before I was 30. And I just had my whole life planned out, you know, from the time I was 14 years old. And, I competed, and like you said, I ended up in a non-drug tested show. So I just got my butt literally kicked, you know, by these guys using performance enhancing drugs, and they just had decades of experience on me. So I you know, competed again a time or two, and then got really busy with school, and then I saw this drug free contest, and I thought, you know, drug free. I've never heard of that. Like you get drug tested. How does this work? So I went there and I won everything. Like I won my class, I won the overall, I did all these things because it was a level playing field now. And I met a guy who was a judge. I think it was the head judge. And he said, you know, I can help you. You know, I happen to own a little gym and, you know, I'm a personal trainer and I help some guys, you know, a couple of my friends, members of my gym are here. And so I met with him and he showed me, he was like, he was probably, even when it comes to pioneering nutrition coaches, before nutrition coaching was a thing, he was just a personal trainer who was managing a gym who would write out meal plans for people. And so he gave me this meal plan. I want you to eat these foods at these times. And it was, you know, this little short list. You can only have rice or potatoes or oatmeal. You can only have, you know, tuna fish or chicken. So I went back to school. I'm in pre-med and physical therapy school, and I'm at, you know, the IU Medical Center doing all of this stuff. And I'm like, well, wait a second. Why can't I eat this food? Why can't I eat this? And one of my questions was, you know, I don't want green beans at every meal. Like the only vegetable I could have were green beans. And I said, what if I want peas? And he said, you can't eat peas. And I said, well, why can't I eat peas? And he said, because it's not on the list. And he just had this list from Flex magazine. So, you know, he's just a conduit of information from these places. So I just looked up, okay, what's in green beans? What's in peas? What's in carrots? If I could just start doing the math. And then I started looking at other foods. If he just wants pasta or rice or oatmeal, what if I want cereal? What if I want even a cookie? Like if it's just protein, carbs, and fat, because I'm the one in school learning this stuff, you know, what would it really matter? So I started just eating what I wanted. So there's your, you know, macro tracking, as long as I was making the math work. I just had reverse engineered what he wanted. So flash forward another 5, 6, 7 years down the road, and now I had my own gym and I was working with nutrition clients, and I had personal trainers working for me that I'm teaching this to. And I started teaching this macro tracking methodology to them, and it worked well. I mean, clients now didn't have the stumbling block of just having a rigid meal plan. They could eat whatever they want as long as they're willing to do some math. So around that time, I did win my pro card and I started competing in the WNBF. And when they saw that, hey, here's this guy who's a pro bodybuilder in our federation and he's got a doctorate in nutrition, like, wow, we really need him to write for our magazines. They had 5 or 6 different magazines in their own little publishing house. So I started writing magazines before social media existed, started writing articles for magazines. And, and so I was writing about things like this, as well as peaking methodologies, and so I started coaching clients. And so in that little window, Matt, in the late 90s to maybe 10 years later, the entire field of nutrition coaching was born. I was the first person to ever physically take money to help a client get ready for a contest or lose weight using macronutrients. So you and every other coach in the world, I mean, that's how short of a path there is from the literal genesis of this industry to where it is now. And it seems so logical, right? Like who wouldn't track macros? Who wouldn't want the quote right amount of protein, carbs, and fat for their goals? It's just so logical. So for me to see what it is now, it's just kind of funny.
Yeah, no, it's truly fascinating, bud. And I was literally just reading a book yesterday, and the guy in the book, has built a huge business and all this, and he said it's such an important thing that you try and work back to like the original source of things, and try and get back to the person that has come up with the original source, because then everybody builds on that and it gains momentum and it gets more refined and it gets even better through other people. And yeah, it's just fascinating to hear that story. So what's your opinion now, Joe? Like on the way that it's being taught, the way that people are actually adopting it into their lives. Like, is it necessary to even go that deep for most day-to-day people? Like, what's kind of your views on that?
Yeah, I think in a way it is, at least initially, but where you start and where you end up doesn't have to always be the same for everybody. So certainly a lot of people would say, man, I don't want to do math and measure every single gram of food and so forth. That's not what I want to do. So a lot of people end up saying, just tell me what to eat. Like I promise I'll do it. I'll do it well. Just tell me what to eat. I don't want to do all of that other stuff. And now you're kind of back to square one, where you have to say, okay, here's a diet. It's a meal plan. It's what you wanted, but I can guarantee you're not going to succeed, because 95% of people regain all of their weight loss within 2 years. At the end of 5 years, statistically, most of us who have tried to diet weigh 107% of our original weight. So we set off to lose weight, and 5 years later, we weigh even more.
Wow.
So, and that's the methodology they use, is just a meal plan, just a diet, just tell me what to eat. But I can start somebody there. I'll say, look, let's create the perfect meal plan for you. The foods you like, your schedule, I'll make it exactly perfect. It'll be the best meal plan you've ever had. And they're excited and they do that. And then within 2 days, they say, well, wait a second, I can't do this Friday because I have this thing. And Saturday, I can't do it because of this thing. And then Monday, I'm taking this trip and I can't do it. I'm like, okay, now we're back to where I said we should start, which is looking at the math of the macronutrients. And now you have some choices. If you can't eat the same way, the same foods, let's figure out what you can eat, because every food has a mathematical value. There's a certain amount of protein, carbs, and fat per serving size. So now you have the freedom to eat whatever you want, as long as it fits within this plan. So now it's total freedom. But then the next iteration of that, Matt, is to take it to an extreme and say, well, if I can eat anything as long as it's within these macronutrient ranges, maybe I can just eat, nothing but beer and chocolate and cheesecake, and I'll just make it fit. I'll just add some protein powder or eat that with a steak and I'll be fine. Have a salad once in a while. And now you're missing out on everything we talked about with the physiology, the metabolic switch. You're certainly compromising your health. You're not going to feel your best. You're not going to be as healthy. So there are still food principles, and there are things that we need to do to align all of our goals, not just losing body fat, in a sustainable way. And that's the key. Regardless of where we are in that trajectory, if we're not doing something that's leading to sustainability, it's not worth it at all. It's like, why even start?
Yeah, no, so true. It's actually something that I teach. Obviously, you're my nutrition coach, but it's something that I teach my guys as well. Like, this is an evolutionary thing where we're going to go from its most simplest form, and then we're probably going to get to its most complex form, in 3, 6, 8, even 12 months down the line, where, every little gram and every little number does count, right? Like when body fat does start getting that bit lower, and we do have to be that bit more accurate with everything. So, but yeah, no, that's super cool. Well, next, Joe, if it's cool with you, mate, I just wanted to jump onto a few sort of everyday questions from
Sure.
my subscribers, and sort of social media questions, things like that. So we've just got 4 or 5 questions. So Reese, who's actually a client of mine, so I did respond to this, given my answer, but I'd like to hear your answer as well. So Reese says, at what stage of body fat reduction does macro ratios become more important? And then he says, and would you need to continue to then adjust the ratios to keep improving? So I think he means keep dropping body fat. And then if so, would there be sort of any ratios that could be applied as body fat keeps coming down? And do you need to keep tweaking those and changing them up?
Really, really great question. And I've got a perfect couple of clients to kind of illustrate this. So I have a gentleman I just started with. He's 22 years old. He's a college student. His goal is just to gain as much muscle as he can, but stay lean. So it's build muscle and secondarily, lose a little bit of body fat. And so I started him off with some pretty wide ranges. I said, based on protein needs, let's start you within this range. And I gave him a range of about 25 grams. And with carbohydrates, I gave him an even bigger range, and fat. And I said, let's just kind of see how you're starting out. Let's get some good days under our belt, and then we'll assess how you're doing. And then I'll kind of refine it down. I'll tighten up the goalposts to where I think it's really affecting him the most. But still, he's going to be somebody without goals that are so specific that you still have a lot of room for error. We can look at net weekly averages. We can look at monthly averages. We've got a lot of flexibility as long as we're achieving his goals. I have another client who's a competitor getting ready for the Miss Olympia. She's starting out in her first, not her first pro show, but her first pro show of the year. And then we're going to go through the rest of the year. And so she's only a couple weeks out from her contest. And now, like you said, Matt, we're looking at, okay, here's your protein level down to the gram because we're already above 3 times the RDA. And here's what research shows. And then we want enough room for carbohydrates. So let's make sure your fat's here. But now, because she's kind of a lean ectomorphic body type, we're having to really make sure she doesn't lose size and fullness. So now I've got her fat intake up to, about almost 30% of calories. And so now we're getting to what you said, some really fine tuning, because she's totally, shredded. I mean, she's got, glute separations and, veins in her abs and so forth. And so we are fine tuning for that perfect peaking process for a top professional show. Much different than a 22-year-old college student just trying to gain muscle.
Yeah.
So, but his goals are still very important to him. It's just that we can still hit his goals by moving the whole range value forward. We don't have to be that precise. So for your client, I would say, give yourself, as I mentioned earlier, the margin that you want for real life and enjoyment. But at the same time, the more precise you are, I think the more precise you can expect your results to be and your interpretation of those. And so I think you'll even learn a little bit more about your body when you're, the more precise you are.
Yeah. Perfect. And what sort of level of body fat would you suggest that somebody would start to ramp protein up a little bit, Joe? Would it be obviously probably dependent on body type, right? And sort of how many calories they're eating in total and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
What would you suggest?
Getting close to your metabolic set point. So that's when you have to be a little bit more careful. So for an average male, that's going to be, around 7 or 8% body fat. So you probably see some abs, you're not as tight as you can be, but you're getting close. Yeah. That's when you got to be a little bit more careful. When I said I maintained, close to my competition weight for 10 years, that was just getting up to that 7 or 8% body fat level and holding it. And so I was still very careful. I'm still getting in the protein, as you mentioned, and I'm still tracking macros to some degree to make sure I'm staying right there. So there was a little bit more of a level of precision necessary. And so for women, it's probably around 12 to 15% body fat is when you're getting low enough that you got to be more careful. And for men, it's anywhere between 7 and 9%.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, no, I actually said to Reese, I said it's probably going to be because he's somebody similar to yourself. So like, slightly slower met rate, got a diet on like 1,500 calories a day, that type of level. So I said probably somebody like yourself, it's definitely going to be like under 10% body fat, and then start
Right.
lifting up. So yeah, no, that's cool. And then Alan asked, how do you stay motivated and not get bored of training and trying to lose weight?
This is an interesting question for me because I've loved training since I was 11, 12 years old. So it's still the most fun part of the day for me. As soon as we're done with this, podcast, Matt, I'm going to go down and train. I'm excited.
Training.
Yeah. I'm already thinking about it. I've already been planning it. It's part of my daily schedule that I love. But I also really value and respect people who, it's not that big of a deal. It's just kind of like taking your medicine. It's like you need to do it, but you don't really like it. There's a lot of value to people who just have that level of discipline, and they're just going to do it because it's the right thing to do. It helps them achieve their goals. So my biggest piece of advice would be to keep churning your way through your training with enough novelty that keeps it interesting. So just like we're talking about tracking food, track the metrics of your training. Plan something, a nice progression. Go online or hire a training coach to map out an exact training program, just like you would a nutrition program, and then stick to it like glue. I mean, work it as hard as you can and see how far you can get. And then, every 3 to 4 months, it's time to do something else. And it may be an entirely different change. Like maybe you do that for 3 or 4 months and then you emphasize cardio work a little bit more, or maybe you love golf, and so you're just going to do the bare minimum during golf season so you can, be out on the course more. But always do something that gives you something to look forward to and track, so you can see progress. If you just go to the gym and you go through the motions, go to the gym, go through the motions like every day, I can see how that would get very boring. I think it's still fun for me because I always have a goal in the gym. There's always something I'm working toward.
Yeah, perfect. Great. And then the next one was from Brian. So Brian, and we'll kind of leave it after this one. So Brian asked, thoughts on supplements, and do we actually need to take them day to day? And if so, which ones would you recommend?
Really, really big question. And we get this all the time. I just did a huge workshop today online on hormones because a lot of people think, what supplements can I take to improve my testosterone levels or my thyroid hormone or something like that? And the answer is always the same in that, first of all, you have to do some research, just reading research to see what has been proven. For example, creatine, the most studied supplement in the history of supplements. And we know its efficacy levels. We know how to take it, when to take it, how to cycle it. We know we have endogenous levels in our body that we have to account for. But it's effective. Like the research shows, it will even help runners, run faster, break PRs. When you take it as somebody who trains, you feel your muscle tissue is tighter and harder because you're pulling in, extra water in there for, to help resynthesize ATP. So there are all these studied values. But Matt, if you or I took creatine and it had some kind of dramatic effect, it came out in the mid 90s. So me taking it repetitively, cycling on and off for 30 years, would I not have gained at least 20 pounds of lean body mass, 40 pounds, 100 pounds, 1,000,000 pounds? Like where is all this progress? I feel the effects when I train, but it has never led to a single pound of lean body mass gain. And it is the best supplement ever studied and introduced into the world. And yet it does absolutely nothing for your long-term lean body mass. Mm-hmm. So you always have to know why you're taking it. Look at the research, because sometimes there could be dangers there and they don't even know because they haven't been studied. So to answer your question in short, I'm not very big on taking supplements unless there is some substantial research and there's an actual long-term benefit. But I'm also still that little kid who used to take his allowance money to the health food store, and I would buy something because I always thought I was going to do something. I was reading those muscle magazines, like I said. So if they did an article on vitamin E and how it helps you do this, and your training is going to be better because you're taking vitamin E, then I'm that little 14-year-old kid going to the grocery store with my money to buy vitamin E. Like we all want those things, but do some diligence and save some money and just make sure you're taking the right things.
No, and it's definitely not, like I always say to my guys, like, it's definitely not the place to start. Like, it's we worry about if we're taking supplements or not, but then we're not worried about like how many calories I'm eating day to day. Like Eric always talks about, right? Like not putting the cart before the horse. So and supplements is probably less than 3% or probably even 1%. I don't know, but it's So that's cool. So that's kind of questions wise, Joe, what I just wanted to ask, and just a few subscribers and stuff. So then next, mate, obviously you're a super smart dude. You're really well rounded, very well studied, all that stuff. So I just want you to drop a big knowledge bomb on us, bud, like something that, I don't know, something that's useful, or just something that's, something crazy about physiology or biology, or, something that that'd be cool to hear.
You start out by saying I was well-rounded, so I was going to pull out like a Nietzsche quote or something. Go to all human behavior on you, but I'll go back to what I was talking about today. What I was doing some preparation all day yesterday for this workshop I did on hormones, and again, we all think that there's this one thing we can do. It's going to elevate our testosterone levels and so forth. So there was this one huge meta-analysis that these researchers did from at University of North Carolina. They looked at all the hormonal interactions that happen in our body in dozens of hormones for body fat loss. And what can you do to impact that? So here's the knowledge bomb. Out of every single thing you can do, every food you can eat, every supplement you can take, every drug you could take, the number one thing you can do to maximize your entire hormonal panel, so testosterone levels, growth hormone, the catecholamine hormones, which really drive body fat loss, like adrenaline and epinephrine and cortisol, is to train hard. They went through in these researchers went through every single thing, and they would say, look, we tested dozens and dozens of supplements, and it's like, they don't really have an impact. We tested this, we tested that, we looked at this, we looked at that. And the only thing you can do to maximize body fat loss is to train aggressively, because when you train your absolute hardest, you can increase growth hormone levels circulating in your bloodstream up to 1,000% for hours. You can't do that from a vitamin or a supplement or a food, but you get enough sleep, reduce stress levels, and you train that aggressively and you do it consistently, then you are operating at the highest level a human can.
Wow, perfect. That's great.